Well, I think that's definitely a quorum. Thanks everyone for joining us. We're just about been a full year now. Maybe this is our 10th or 11th. We're getting close to a full year, and some of you have been on many of those. So that's terrific. It's encouraging, and yeah, we're going to keep doing these. So today we just want to touch on this increasingly important question of relationships and its role in effective collaboration. So I've got a few slides as usual. I'll just share my screen now. Yeah, just as usual, we've got a few slides to talk through. We'll show you a tool or two and a process or two that we have found relevant. So, Trust, John, will you admit those people as they come in?
Yeah, I certainly will.
Yeah. So, you know, in all our work, it seems that lots of people are technically really proficient, and you know they know how to do the job, and yet when they're working with others across partnerships with other stakeholders, you know, things can get a bit sticky, and it's where the challenges seem to sit. So this thing about trust, relationships, getting on with my collaborators, being able to work with people that I don't necessarily like, and vice versa. How do we do that? What's the impact of that? This seems to be a place where people get stuck, and it's where help is often needed. And it's often a place and a time when people call us, help. You know, I don't know how to manage this relationship anymore, or that person, this person. You know, it's definitely a challenge for people. So we have found ourselves thinking and working in this space for a while, and supporting clients to make some progress. This today, you know, this you might say is a fundamental idea underpinning the conversation today, and it is about conversations. That when we are collaborating or working with others, we like to dive to the transaction, to the work, to the solution, to the action. But when it's difficult and challenging, we need firm relationships in order to have tough discussions around the transaction, the detail. And in order to build relationships, we can't do that without the conversation. So conversations build relationships. Relationships, strong relationships, are the underpinning. They allow the transaction. And I think just philosophically, that's underpinning everything we'll talk about today.
It was interesting, Stuart. Yesterday I had a client talking to me, and they said they'd had a conversation about the content. It was conversations that matter, but the realization they made very quickly in the meeting was that conversations matter. It was less about the content. It was all about the conversation that was building the relationship. So it reflected very much what you're talking about, the tendency to want to go to transaction, but the realization that conversations matter.
Yes, that's good, isn't it? They went from conversations that matter to conversations matter.
Yeah.
And there's a subtle but a really important realization there. That's good to hear. Just, you know, it's people collaborate. Organizations don't collaborate. You know, these abstract things called teams don't collaborate. It's people. People work with people. And so ultimately it all comes down to that, doesn't it? How am I working with you? Another point we might make here is that this is about going slow to go fast. The investment in the conversations, the investment in the relationships allows the progress to move more slowly. This stuff is the oil in the machine, isn't it? So if we can invest, go slow, we can go fast, if that makes sense. So what does it look like? These are things we have seen, you've probably seen similar, and other things as well. So despite the importance of relationships, it is abundantly clear that we all, I do it as much as anyone, I'm sure, focus on the content. We get to the content. We tend not to even acknowledge these things or feelings, let alone go there and sit there and explore there and reveal there. It's often all about the data. I can see people talking, data, detail, knowledge, content. I see a lack of trust. We hear people, don't we, John, saying, "I'm not sure if I really can trust them." They might say it to us, but I'm not sure they say it to each other for obvious reasons.
I think it's that lack of safety. So we do seem to see people feel a little unsafe, which is probably one of the reasons they don't. It's a flight to safety to some extent, and the content's much safer than talking about feelings. So that's a sense we get as well.
Yeah, that's right. And so I see people in that space. Of course, it makes it really hard for them to work on the tough stuff. And complex projects are full of tough stuff, aren't they? It's just by their nature. They are difficult, often difficult things to resolve, and everyone sees it differently. And without the trust, without the relationships, it's hard. So we tend to get defensive. I'm interested, we want to talk a little bit about, we don't just wallow in the problem of it. We want to shortly turn to here's what we think we can do about it, or you can do about it. But I'm interested in your experience, if anyone's willing to unmute themselves and just pipe up. I'm interested in what the group thinks about why do we tend to avoid, even in your experience, do we tend to avoid that? So there's a question. Why do you think we tend to avoid discussions about relationships? Anyone ready to pipe up?
Hi, Stuart. It's Michelle here.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi, John. I think I'm speaking from the perspective of a woman here, and a woman in a particularly male-dominated industry in which I work. And it can be difficult to talk about relationships within the context of certain industries. Women, as you know, are far more willing to talk about how are you feeling and how can we help you, whereas a man wants to go straight to, right, well, there's the fix, there's the solution. So it can be difficult to broach that if you've been, let's say, knocked about a few times and then you find that resistance build up. Yeah. And if you're not brave enough to then step back into that ring again and again and again, you'll find those barriers there.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. So gender is clearly a part of it in your experience, absolutely. Anyone else? Why else do we avoid discussions about relationships?
Hi, Stuart. It's Sally here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Similar to Michelle, I have had those experiences, but I think what I've been realizing lately is that we avoid the discussion because we don't have the skills and the knowledge to have the discussion. So in a space where I might ask a team how they're feeling, or where I might ask them to talk about feelings, or that it's okay to be uncomfortable, the uncomfortableness skyrockets because nobody knows how to respond or interact with that, and they don't have any knowledge or skills to bring with them to participate.
Yeah, rabbit in the headlights, a room full of rabbits in the headlights. That sometimes
exactly.
when you go to that feeling space. Yeah, absolutely. I think you're dead right. Something about our capability, our practice, our level of skill about being open about that stuff could use some work. We're pretty good at the data, but that stuff can be left behind in our education. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't train people, we don't teach people, we don't provide insight in how to do that all through our education system. In my experience, I went through the whole thing. I don't think I ever came across anything that came close to mentioning that.
That's right. So I think, as John mentioned, some of the reasons we we hypothesize, I guess, based on what we see, is that flight to safety. And it's kind of, as you've just said, Sally, it's much safer to stay on the data, the information, the reports, all of that stuff. That's safe territory. But how I feel about the data, the information reports, and how I feel about how you seem to be interpreting the information and reports, that's territory that is much less comfortable. So we avoid it. The flight to safety. I watch groups and I see them go there. The question seems so obvious, but we don't go there. We're back into the data. And I think you go, John.
I think it's quite threatening to some. I had a boss I remember at BHP years ago, and he said to me, "John, how do I deal with," it was Kylie, one of the female metallurgists, she comes in and cries, had no mechanism for just acknowledging and dealing with emotion. So he was a bit frustrated and scared about how can I have those type of conversations. So it just was right outside the comfort zone.
Yeah. And we get nervous about if it's feelings, and if we're in the context of our project is struggling a bit and we're struggling in this partnership or this collaboration, I'm worried that I might get a bit angry. I might raise my voice. I might lose my wick. All this stuff is unprofessional and embarrassing, and I don't want to go there. So it's safer not to go there, or they might get angry at me, which is even more uncomfortable. So I think is all part of it. It's very natural, very human. I'm sure we are all familiar with these feelings. So what to do about it? Well, go back to school and get a different education would be something about it. But I think the two things we want to talk about today is finding a way to make some of this feeling stuff and the trust stuff and the relationship quality stuff visible. That's a first step. And I guess we can make it visible firstly to ourselves, because we're just as, I can avoid my own feelings and avoid thinking about their feelings, my own flight to safety. So if all I can do is make it visible how I'm feeling to myself, then that's a really useful first step. Of course, we want to also find a way to make it visible to them, and for them to make that visible to us. So I guess we'll be talking about these two things. How do we make it a little visible in a safe way? And how do we improve that? How do we work on that? So that's where we're going next. And something that we have created, which is not the answer, but we have found this to be, just a useful part of the process, is what we call a Trustometer, and it's just a way for me to stop, to ask questions of myself about the extent to which I trust them, the strength of my relationship with them. We can all leave a meeting, stewing, a bit angry, but not really articulate, or not go there, not take the time to analyze all of that stuff. So we like data. We've already said that. So here's a way to turn our feelings into some data that we can actually work with. So it simply asks us to rate, place a rating against a range of questions. So it's just asking me to think about the extent to which, question 6, am I confident that they disclose everything to me? Or is my internal monologue about, well, they're hiding something? I was working with a client yesterday, and a couple of times in our hour together, hidden agendas came up. So there's something going on that they are hiding something, or they are at least not sharing things. And that's a pretty good way to undermine trust.
And I guess you were saying, Stuart, that they had no vehicle to be able to lay that on the table, that I think there are hidden agendas. This might be a vehicle that would allow them to at least put that on the table. I think what we've found is when your cards are face up, it's easy to deal with stuff, and finding ways for people to just be able to, and maybe slightly obliquely, start to put their feelings out, and to recognise it's about the relationship, not just about the content. And we find that something like this is just a vehicle that can actually help people do that. Engineers love and scientists often like the spreadsheet, I can add it up. It's really not about the score. It's more about just asking different questions of yourself and perhaps of the group, or asking them to ask different questions of themselves or the group, that actually can get a different conversation going that's more related to the relationship than the content. Very directly impacts the content, and I think people see that, because if they don't disclose things to me, and well, we're not going to make progress on the content. So it's a pretty close link.
Yeah, that's right. And so I guess if you're really not feeling safe, you just keep this to yourself, but at least it's making it visible in your own head, and you can find ways to, move that forward. Where it's a bit safer, you might share it with your team. You might do this with your team. You might, if you really, want to dial it up, you sit in the room with your collaborators and talk through these questions together. So, that obviously takes a different level of comfort, I guess, or risk appetite.
I think, Stuart, the other thing that just strikes me about the tool is that it also is a little safer, because it's talking about trust. It's not talking about me, but it's how I'm feeling about, the relationship. So I wonder if it helps by removing it a little from me having to say that I'm frustrated. I can just say, yeah, I'm not this element. I'm seeing something different. So it might make it that safety, I think, that we talked a bit about. How do you actually, how does this help in that space?
Yeah, nice. So I'm just going back to the PowerPoint. Quick question. Anyone, if I was to say, how would you use it? Would this use it? What's your top of mind reaction at this point, just looking at that tool? I wonder if anyone's willing to share that.
Hi, Stuart. It's Michelle again. Awfully talkative today. Sorry about that. Absolutely. I'm salivating at this one. This is absolutely terrific. Yes, would be using it.
Well, okay, very good. Anyone else got a different take on that? Okay. All right. Well, that's great, Michelle. Lovely to hear. And look, I think, like all these things, give it a crack, and give it a crack in as safe way as you need to, and just see if it does open up some other realizations first, then potential conversations, relationships, transaction. So that's a tool that is currently available on our website. You can go to our resources pages and download that there. Now, in terms of how to do something about it, I wonder, John, if you want to talk to us about your two mates, Joe and Harry.
Yeah, okay. So this is just something that I've always found useful, just a way of thinking about how do you actually improve the relationship? How do you actually work on that relationship by sharing information? And this is just you may have seen this, is just a simple format. Joseph Luft and Harry Ingram put it together. That's why it's Joe and Harry's window. And they just talk about the size of what we call the shared domain, information that we share with others, known to others, known to me. We all know it's that quadrant. And there's information that we know others don't, and others know that we don't. And they're the they know and I know spaces. And what we found, next slide, Stuart, what Joe and Harry hypothesized was that it's the size of that public domain we all know that is related to the quality of the relationship. If you think about the person you're nearest and dearest, you probably have a pretty big window. You know a lot about each other. There's not many secrets. Whereas if you think about the people you work with, some of the people you mightn't work terribly well with, maybe that window's a bit smaller. So Joe and Harry reckons there's two ways to increase the size of this public domain. It's feedback and disclosure. So if there's stuff that's known to me but not known to others, it might be how I react to what I'm thinking about. if I disclose that, that's one way of actually improving the relationship by increasing the size of that public domain. There's information that's known to other people, like it might be how I come across, for instance. It's unknown to me, as I'm blind to it. And that's where feedback, listening and hearing from others, their experience of you, their experience of the situation you're talking about, their experience of your data, etc., that again increases the size of that public domain. Now, you can probably imagine that disclosure and feedback can be a bit challenging at times because it actually requires a little bit of that uncertainty and the vulnerability. So again, you're looking to find safer places and you start with what you can do. It's really just looking for opportunities to both disclose what's going on and provide feedback. And advocacy and inquiring about how people are thinking about something can help tease out that information. Advocating about what you're thinking can be part of disclosure. So that those two tools of advocacy and inquiry are key parts of increasing the size of that public domain. And try it out. My experience is that as you do that, you're likely to improve the relationship and make it easier to have those type of conversations that we're talking about. Increase trust, have better conversations, build relationships that lets you get the content done much more effectively.
Yeah, and if you talk about this, not in terms of feelings, but in terms of feedback and disclosure, it's just make it more of a sort of a healthy process. Here's a framework. What do we disclose? What do we seek feedback on? I'm just reminded, John, bizarrely, something I haven't thought of for years, but just listening to you talk, when I was a teenager at boarding school, I went and spent a few days with a mate, his family in the school holidays out there in Western Sydney somewhere. And, had a good time, and it was a week later back at school, and my mate Peter said, you make a funny noise when you eat, and my whole family was sitting there listening to you, and like I had no idea, and they couldn't tell me, and so there was no disclosure, and I certainly wasn't seeking feedback about how I'm eating, but I can just picture the whole family there sitting on edge every time we sat down. In terms of the relationship, not healthy, and no one's got the ability to provide feedback or do that. And so we sit there in that painful moment. And yes, like I had no idea, of course. How would I know?
You were blind to it and had an impact on what you were trying to do together. Which is really the story, isn't it, about most of our relationships when they're trying to do difficult work. We often sit there in that painful moment, thanks, Lucy, and put up with it. The opportunity is to do something about it. But for those reasons you mentioned before, it can be quite challenging. So experiment a bit, try it in safer places and get more confidence. As the group goes in confidence, you'll find they're more able to have these conversations.
Yeah. So feedback could be in the workplace. When you bring your team of people into our workspace, it makes me think that you don't trust us. I feel untrusted when you bring your experts in when we think it's our job to do that. For example, that would be me sharing that, and you could probably start to have a conversation about that. All right, well, we only have a few more minutes left and we're essentially nearly done. I wonder if anyone's, just before we move on, got a question about that, about Johari window, or anything you'd like to add or say? Michelle? Only joking.
We won't put it on you, Michelle.
Yeah. All right, so just to wrap up, really, this thing that I think is really visible in groups, and we all do it, is the avoidance, the flight to safety. And where do we find it safe is data. And it becomes a real dysfunction. In all my years of doing stakeholder engagement stuff, you see communities demanding more information. You see proponents desperately tearing their hair out, trying to get ever bigger reports made public. And, how do we give everyone all the information? it's a conversation everyone has about data. I need to know more, and it's either you can't have that data, or we'll give you as much information as we can. It just absorbs everyone's time. But really, it's not a conversation about the data. It's a conversation about, we don't trust you. And of course, it's because we can't go there. It becomes this other dysfunctional thing. So having some skills, having some simple processes of disclosure and feedback is really useful. Conversations, any conversations. I think, John, your line is really relevant. Conversations matter, not conversations about things that matter. It's the conversations that matter. Yeah. Having some tools, and there are probably Googleable 1,000 tools out there. We like our Trustometer as just a way into that conversation, making stuff, raising it from below the line to above the line, if only for me, but ideally between us.
Stuart, just a quick one. We use a simple tool called an ORID, which is a conversation tool, and it's objective, reflective, implications, and interpretive and decisional. And if you think the second part of the conversation tool is called reflective, it just asks people, how did they feel about that? Something happened. How did you react? How did you feel? And just asking that question can make a big difference. People said, oh, I felt a bit frustrated, I got a bit angry. You're actually starting to tease out some of that stuff that can dig into. So there's lots of simple tools that you can do in conversation about the content that can help you start to have some of the conversations that do matter about the relationship.
Yeah. The other one, while you're talking, John, is at the front of the room, often in rooms, situations where there's a fair bit of passion in the room, name it. Some of you will be feeling, I'm feeling. If we can name that, normalize the sense that we can talk about it, that we are humans, that we do have emotions, just get it on the table up front. We will be, some of us will be feeling, some of us will be feeling why. And that's a really helpful way. I see that helps people relax and just say, yeah, I am feeling like that. That's right.
Even a simple check-in process, Stuart, we tend to jump straight to the content. 90% of meetings, people are going, right, let's get into item 1 on the agenda. Just stopping and asking people how they are. Quick check-in, how you're feeling right now, can be quite revealing, can start that conversation and normalise that it's all right to talk about how we are as much as what we're doing.
Yeah. All right. So look, that's that. It's just time to send you all on your lunchtime. Just a quick grab about our next webinar. We'll be talking about that context when we are needing to collaborate with them, but it looks like they're not willing or wanting to. So how do we collaborate with them when they don't want to? Got some practical tips. Now, I haven't got that webinar into Eventbrite yet. It's on my list, but that's the date. Get it in your calendar, and it'd be great to see you there. So John and I will stick around. Happy to keep talking if anyone wants to just have a chat. Otherwise, go forth and build trusting relationships. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for the comments in the chat. Anybody, if you just want to make a comment about how you found today, that'd be great.
Yeah, indeed. That's
Thanks, Stuart and John.
Thank you.
Thanks.